While I understand the fact that many enjoy having restricted classes because it can make the races feel more distinct from one another, I personally don't like the Planet of Hats trope, where a whole species is treated as a monolith that cannot, or should not in the opinions of some, be changed. That doesn't mean, however, that I want all races to just get slapped with classes they previously didn't engage with, and that's that. I want them to be implemented in a manner similar to the Heritage Armor sets, with a questline exploring what these new practitioners are about and why they exist now. To that end, you would need to complete these quests with the relevant race to unlock access to that class combination. Now, why am I talking about this? Well, a little while ago I held a poll over on Twitter asking people which race they felt made the least sense as Druids, and Mechagnomes won by a large margin over Forsaken and Void Elves. And for some reason, Draenei cropped up a surprising amount as a fourth option, which I didn't expect, considering they can be shamans, but we'll get to them eventually. The point is, people were really convinced that Mechagnomes just could not make sense as Druids. Let's see about that. So, as it stands, Gnomergan, the former underground capital of the gnomes, is still kind of up in the air. Its situation is ambiguous. We know for sure that Thermoplug, the man responsible for irradiating the place and killing 80% of his own people, is dead. We also know that at least part of the city is controlled by the gnomes, as the Survivor Assistance Facilitation Expedition, or SAFE, is seen cleaning up multiple areas during the Gnome Heritage story. To begin this questline, the player would be contacted via mail by a gnome called Sprig Rainlight. She'd ask for help in a matter close to home, and after meeting her in New Tinkertown, she would explain that she and her team have been searching for alternative methods to help clean up Gnomergan for good. Whilst the upper levels of the city are well on their way to becoming livable again, SAFE ran into a major problem. It seems that Thermoplug left a string of unpleasant surprises in the lowest depths of the city where the Trogs initially attacked from. Pollution they can clean up eventually, but the biggest problem he left them was a machine designed to lure more Trogs to the city. The beasts are simply too thick to fight through while their first tunnels are still open, and the level of radiation down there requires protective gear they simply do not have enough of for the size of force required to even have a chance of reaching the tunnels. To that end, Gelban Mechatalk has greenlit projects to find a way around this problem so they can shut down that machine and close the original tunnels. The problem, Sprig tells us, is that everyone is so blinkered by what they know that they're unwilling to consider anything unfamiliar. All the projects thus far have utilized technology, especially those that propose digging around the Trogs, but machinery makes far too much noise and draws their attention. Sprig argues that she studied the natural world since she was a child. It's more than just resources to exploit and refine. There are thousands upon thousands of systems, great and small, of truly bewildering complexity around us. We could stand to learn from it. She's tried to convince the High Tinkerer of her research's merit in this matter, but without something more substantial than fast-growing plants, he's been unwilling to hear her out. In order to gain more knowledge and further her project, Sprig asks for the player's help in traveling to talk to different experts in this field. She isn't a fighter, most of her research team isn't, so she'd appreciate the help of a hero. The team in question is made up of both gnomes and mechagnomes, including one of the latter who acts as Sprig's research partner, Cerebrus Stormpipe. Another thing of note is that everyone on the team has the title Environmentalist, retaining a more clinical, scientific, but nonetheless passionate approach to the natural world. Over the course of this questline, the player helps by escorting Sprig and her team to 4 different druids, each of them imparting wisdom and teachings that guide the environmentalists to the answers they seek. They can be druids the player has seen before, or just for this questline, it doesn't matter too much, but we'd see them further the abilities they've already begun to cultivate, healing injured wildlife with the first teacher, encouraging regrowth in the aftermath of a fire with the second, and communing with the Emerald Dream with the third. Over the course of these quests, Cerebrus and the other mechagnomes don't appear to have had trouble harnessing the magic of druids, but it's noted that it feels strange passing through their mechanical parts, like phantom limb syndrome, while the limb is still there. For the 4th and final teacher, we travel to Moonglade where Sprig and her group speaks to Cenarius, reasoning that he taught some of the greatest druids the world has ever known, and surely knows something that will help them cross the final boundary: shapeshifting. Cenarius is intrigued by the gnome's request and agrees to help, guiding the group through the motions of learning to shapeshift. This proves troublesome, and the player is sent to gather various herbs, effigies, and other tools to help align the group's focus. When it doesn't appear to help, rather than give up, Cenarius encourages Sprig to turn inward and envisage what feels most natural and instinctive. There are wild gods and ancient spirits for all manner of creatures, they only need to be contacted, but he warns to look before you jump. The Druids have discovered uncontrollable forms before, after all. After a moment, Sprig yelps and shapeshifts into a boar-like creature with the frame used by Might of the Grizzlemaw. She falls over in surprise, equally amazed and confused. At this, Cenarius would posit that Agamagan seems to have taken an interest in her efforts. Boars, and especially domesticated pigs, are highly intelligent creatures with just as much capacity for brute strength as problem-solving. The great boar saw your heart and your desire to dig as the trogs do. Now you have the strength to do so. While the rest of the group tries to replicate Sprig's transformation, Cenarius would turn to the Mechagnomes and specifically to Cerebrus, encouraging him to do the same. Of course, Cerebrus hesitates and rattles off a number of reasons why he couldn't possibly shapeshift as Sprig has. His body is incomplete in the eyes of nature, he willfully chose to spurn biology in pursuit of higher function, and he doesn't regret that, but he fears what will happen if he tries to shift. Cenarius kneels before him and asks Cerebrus if he has felt the flow of nature through his body, metal and all. He answers yes. Cenarius asks him if he felt the warmth of life swelling within his spirit when he did so, and he answers yes. Smiling, Cenarius taps the metal covering the gnome's eyes. As far as the dream is concerned, this does not define who you are. It does not care how much of your flesh is gone. So long as your spirit is open and you are willing to try, that is all that matters. After a beat, he would add, besides, the magic is not so clumsy that you need to remove anything that might offend. How many druids have you seen discard their weapons and armor before shifting? Cerebrus pauses, contemplating, and concedes the point, agreeing to at least try. Guided to the same end as Sprig, Cerebrus would eventually transform into the same boar-like creature with a distinct difference. For Mechagnome druids, all that is flesh becomes bark and leaves, and all that is metal becomes solid energy shaped by their soul, like effigies of living wood brought to life. Cerebrus is fascinated and returns to his bipedal form to find it just as he left it, remarking that the change feels like a warm wave of electricity passing through him from head to toe. The gathered gnomes celebrate their achievements, and we return to New Tinkertown, where Sprig brings her report to Gelbin. Astounded by the progress and willing to hear her out, the questline would eventually end with a scenario where the environmentalists dig down to the lower levels of Gnomergan without alerting the Trogs, thanks to the lack of loud machinery tipping them off. The original Trog tunnels are finally sealed, and the lure is turned off, allowing the combined forces of the High Tinkerer and Prince Erasmin to descend with guns and cleaner bots. The Trogs' numbers are lowered enough to safely begin taking them down with knockout gas for capture and relocation to the Badlands where they originated. Meanwhile, the remaining leper gnomes are also tranquilized to be moved to a district in the upper part of Gnomergan that has been prepped to act as a research and medical ward for treatment and hospice care. So this questline would end with Gnomergan unambiguously and permanently returned to the full control of the gnomish people. Ideally, this would mean the gnome intro changes to reflect that, where the part of the city you start in is refurbished and you're mainly helping with the cleanup process rather than frantically escaping an irradiated hell pit. For me, the gnome druid forms would look as follows. Cat form would look like an overgrown Cornish Rex, goofy little guys who are nonetheless considered one of the smartest cat breeds. Bear form would be as described. They would look like if the Grizzlemaw form was a boar more than a bear, and that's because pigs are actually very smart, but they also make a habit of churning up the ground, so dig away. Moonkin would be styled like a burrowing owl, just because it's cute. For ground travel, they'd look like a border collie because they are very hard-working and intelligent dogs. Their air travel form would be a pigeon, because pigeons are very underappreciated but clever. Kind of like gnomes. For water, an octopus. You understand the theme here. The only difference for mechagnomes would be what I described with Cerebrus, where flesh becomes wood and metal is spirit energy. On the other side of the coin, For our little green friends, you'd think druids wouldn't be out of the question because they have shaman, but considering their totems look like drills pumping out exhaust fumes, yeah, in this version of things we're just going to pretend that goblin shaman aren't like that, because why bastardize the idea of a class to align with the single defining characteristic of an entire group of people when you could open up different avenues for the race in question? But Morgan, goblins are greedy and only care about technology. Sure, if you lack the range to write a group of people as anything other than a rigid, unchanging monolith, which as we all know is extremely realistic and good world building. Anyway, the goblin player would be contacted by an NPC called Sabina Goldenspark, who invites them on a journey of self-discovery with her now that Gallywix is an increasingly distant memory. You'd meet up in Orgrimmar where Sabina and her followers are attempting to figure out where to go with their lives as they find themselves dissatisfied with the mores of mainstream goblin society, the constant hustle and grind, greed, rat racing, and corporate bureaucracy that doesn't give a damn about you. New leadership wasn't going to change that overnight. Sabina remarks that Gazlo is a better goblin than Jastor, to be sure, but they want something truly different. To that end, we go around talking to different members of the Horde throughout the city, learning more about their varied beliefs and if it hits the chord the goblins are looking for. First, they talk to an old Shadowmoon orc priest in the Cleft of Shadows, who talks to them about the ancestors and the movement of the stars above. While Sabina politely listens and respects the old priest, she doesn't find much to respect in her past, just more capitalistic backstabbing and leaving people for dead when they're all used up. At the suggestion of a follower, the second person Sabina's group talks to is a troll priest, a worshipper of Loas. I'd make it clear here that goblin priests once followed in the footsteps of ancient Zandalari customs when their people were still enslaved, but due to the origins of that practice and the greedy exploitation of it over time, the group was reluctant to consider it. Nonetheless, our troll priest would outline the basics of what the Darkspear practice, explaining that different tribes have different ways of communing with the same Loa. He also diplomatically refuses to explain in great detail the intricacies of that practice to outsiders. Sabina thanks him for explaining what he could, and the group moves on, reassured that Loa worship is just not what they're after. The third person they talk to would be a Tauren paladin, giving us insight into the relationship between the Tauren and their sun god Anshe. This unfortunately doesn't hit the mark either, but before the group can leave, the Sunwalker points them to a druid by the name of Rule Snowhoof. Rule is a minor NPC druid from Ashenvale that you free from Thistlefur Hold and has no definable personality, so we're going to give him one here. Curious that a group of goblins are approaching him, Rule explains what being a druid means to him. Druids safeguard the natural world from disaster, they nourish the land and keep it healthy, healing sickness, returning the dead, and removing those who would do harm to both it and those who rely on it. This finally strikes a chord, and the goblins become excited, all but pelting Rule with more questions, so he humors them and begins to teach them the basics. As the goblins progress, Rule has the player help him by fetching materials such as seeds and fish. With these, he shows the goblins how to foster life by growing a seed in their hands and from the ground, and teaches them that life and death is a cycle of renewal by encouraging fungus and small animals to break down the fish. Forests such as the Grizzly Hills grow from the salmon swimming to their ancestral spawning grounds, only to perish in the aftermath, leaving their bodies to feed the soil. Some places have more to work with than others, and the nutrients are constantly cycling back and forth. During one particular lesson in the Northern Barrens, the group sits atop one of the hills, trying to stretch out their senses and connect with the land. One of the goblins notes that there's something strange about the air, and Sabina answers that it's clear. No exhaust, no fumes, no industrial waste clogging up their lungs. Another goblin quietly admits to always hating the smell of oil. One time he found a flower clinging to life on Kazan and took it home. He hid it from the rest of his family as he made sure it got enough water and sun to thrive, but they found it, and they accused him of planning some kind of perfume business venture without telling them and smashed it. They didn't believe he just enjoyed taking care of it. After a moment, Sabina smells something familiar on the wind and the group heads down to investigate, only to find the venture company at work, drilling for oil in a remote part of the Barrens. The goblins immediately want to do something about it. The venture company isn't protected by membership with the Horde, but Rule urges caution as they aren't ready for something like this. Their abilities aren't fully formed yet. Sabina declares that they may not be fully fledged druids in practice yet, but they can be in spirit, and they know how to deactivate the kind of technology Venture is using to prevent more damage from being done. Her group knows how to fight, they know how to hide, and they know how to outsmart their enemy. Putting his faith in them, Rule agrees to help the group deal with the drilling, and the player is tasked with sneaking around and dropping seeds, while Sabina and her group stealthily disable the drills. Once all the seeds are dropped, Rule causes them to sprout, growing into a wall of brambles that encircles the drilling operation. The group pounces, knocking out and otherwise incapacitating the Venture Company workers and killing the mercenaries guarding the operation if they don't first surrender. Nothing would be blown up or set on fire. The idea is to set these goblins apart from what most people expect so that the idea of a goblin druid is actually believable. They were intelligent, curious, and stealthy. They're just not interested in machinery or gold. Local horde forces are called in to round up those captured, as this was very much an illegal drilling operation. The goblins are very proud of themselves, and so is Rule, offering the group a big hug, which they take him up on by tackling him to the ground all at once. The questline would then end with Rule teaching them to shapeshift. And what are the goblin forms? The cat form would be a caracal. It's about the ears. The bear form would look like a honey badger more than an actual bear, because honey badgers are tenacious little bastards who do not give a shit how small they are compared to you. Moonkin, this would use the Arakoa rig and be styled like a magpie, very clever birds who have an eye for trinkets. You might assume I mean valuable things like gems or gold, but no, trinkets can be anything, like a cool pebble you found on a beach. Ground travel would be a fox, clever and highly mischievous. Air travel would be a magpie for the same reason as Moonkin. Water travel? A dolphin for the same reasons as the fox. Hi, Editing Morgan here. I just want to add a couple of things that might have gotten lost in translation. Specifically, the general gist of gnome druids would be heavy interest in biomimicry and green tech. However, that would look in the Warcraft setting. They'd be like the scientists today figuring out how to make flood-resistant rice or designing better wind turbines by studying bird wings. On the other side, goblin druids would almost be like eco-warrior hippies, but not in that obnoxious way you see in shows or films to make people who care about the environment look bad. They just want to live grounded, healthy lives and break free of the mindset that led to the state Kazan was left in. Okay, on to the outro. Now, could there be a better way of doing this? Probably. I don't claim to be perfect, but I do think that making these class combinations something you have to unlock with a questline would greatly help flesh out the world and its lore. Special shoutouts to my patrons who are all very handsome people, and especially to my newest supporters, Luca and Nublin. Thank you for watching, don't forget to hydrate, take your medication, and treat yourselves kindly.